What comes to your mind when you think of Candlewood Lake? A place to swim or launch a boat? A great address? Candlewood Lake is much, much more than a beautiful recreational and residential landmark. It is an extraordinary engineering project. History shows us that with each new and major change in civilization, there seems to be a few men and women who are on the cutting edge of recognizing what is required and how to accomplish it. This was the case in the early 1900s in southwest Connecticut, including our town of New Fairfield. Farming was the main industry, with a few small businesses located in the east and west center districts. However, the advancement of so many new inventions required electrical power to meet the needs of industry and the modern home. Attorney J. Henry Rohraback envisioned a way to produce hydropower electricity, combining water from several New Fairfield ponds with the nearby Housatonic River. He formed the Connecticut Light and Power Company and began purchasing properties in town in 1919. Charles L. Campbell, an agent for CL&P, purchased the 300-acre ancestral farm of Franklin Pierce Wanzer as one of the first buyouts and ending Wanzer ownership since 1745. Property was bought for the current land prices at that time. Gone were tobacco and dairy farms, roads, bridges, homes, cemeteries, and even a school. Who were these folks who were given no choice but to sell and move? We have explored the background of a few of them and would like to share it with you. In 1919, Franklin Pierce Wanzer sold a portion of the land holdings that one time measured over 1,000 acres. This prime property included one of the highest mountains in southwestern Connecticut, 1,100 feet, fertile valleys, and even a cemetery. Again, in 1926, Franklin sold an additional 235 acres to CL&P. He lived out his years in a small cabin overlooking Squance Pond. Today, the Wanzer family is remembered by a single sign, Wanzer Hill, welcoming residents and visitors to Candlewood Hills and Sail Harbor. 3 members of the Ballard family lived in the Wood Creek district of town. David operated a mill and a grist mill. His brother James was a painter by trade, and Ezra Ballard was a blacksmith. At the age of 37 years, Ezra enlisted to serve his country during the War of the Rebellion, as did his brother David. Not only the living were displaced with the creation of Candlewood Lake, those who had gone before were too. Wood Creek Cemetery, also called Turrell Cemetery, was established about 1810 and was in the way of the hydro project. Workers were paid $1 per disinterment, and most of the 105 remains were moved to the new Mountain View Cemetery on Route 37. This was the resting place of farmers, hatters, and carriage makers, and a man named Jesse Hine, whose epitaph states that he was born a slave, died a free man. The graves of many war veterans were also at Wood Creek. Private Reuben Stevens, Private Oliver Turrell were Revolutionary War soldiers. Private Herman Benedict fought in the War of 1812. 9 Civil War veterans were buried here in the biographies of Lyman Cole, Elias Cromwell, George F. Cromwell, Sylvester Freeman, George W. Truesdale, Orrin C. Turner, Ephraim G. Whitlock, and Wheeler J. Viets are recorded in the book New Fairfield Answered the Call. New Fairfield topography contains high peaks, swamps, forests, and the area that CL&P chose for Candlewood Lake was the most fertile in town. From the causeway separation from Squanץ, there were successful farmers like John and Selina Waldron who owned 20 head of cattle and several barns spread up Bogus Hill and crossing west of the highway. After the lake buyout, they moved from their 90 acres to a little house in the center of town. Their lake house still stands, lovingly restored. Can you spot it as you travel on Route 39? Their southern neighbor was the Treadwell family. John and Marshall were dairy farmers too. Tobacco and hay was cut on their 300-acre spread. After the flooding, John Henry Treadwell and his wife Ruth moved to Wilton, Connecticut. Marshall Treadwell and his teacher wife Valeria moved to 249 Ball Pond Road. This house is restored and located across from Company A Firehouse. Walter and Mary Treadwell Chatterton described their farm on tax records as 25 tilled meadows, pastures, orchards, and 24 acres of woodland. Their 5 milk cows produced 600 pounds of butter. They dug 100 bushels of potatoes, cut 20 tons of hay, and raised pigs and chickens in a year. They were partners with their son Robert Chatterton and his family. They visualized the future of lakeshore property and retained part of the property to open Chatterton Marina on the point of Knollcrest in 1929. It is still in operation and family run. From the marina's boat launch, there is a spectacular view south and east down the former valley. You can imagine Henry Backer's 300-acre farm. He was a German immigrant who came to the U.S. in 1872. His large holdings included several barns, one of which was destroyed in March of 1927, when Camp No. 9 of the construction workers was completely demolished by fire. This was particularly hard for the workers because the food supply for the entire workforce was stored there. $200 worth of meat was prematurely roasted. We assume Mr. Backer was not too thrilled to lose his barn either. The causeway connecting Candlewood Isle with the mainland runs through the Backer property. The family of Edwin and Betsy Chase lived on Shortwoods Road. Edwin was a farmer and a charcoal burner. Arthur Holdrick Chase was a son of Edwin and Betsy. He married Georgiana Foster in 1906. They lived in the Rocky River Valley area known as Wood Creek Road until they sold their property to Ephraim and Roberta Foster. Arthur was expanding his farming endeavors when he purchased the Isaac Knapp homestead and 350 acres in the center of town. After Art's death, the property was sold for a shopping center. The homestead was moved from its picturesque location on the corner of Route 37 and Brush Hill Road and became known as Village Hardware. Today, the building stands empty and decrepit in the shopping center. Roberta Dayton and Ephraim Foster were married on February 25, 1909, in the Congregational Church in New Fairfield. In 1909, they purchased land and buildings from Arthur and Georgiana Chase. Ephraim was a carpenter by trade and also served as the Fish and Game Warden for more than 25 years. One of his duties as game warden was to take Babe Ruth hunting. Roberta, known affectionately as Ma, was well known for her cooking and baking. She also perfected recipes for rabbit, squirrel, venison, and whatever else F would bring home from one of his hunting trips. After selling their home to Candlewood Light and Power Company, they continued to live in New Fairfield near the center of town. Flooding abolished Neversink Road and most of Wood Creek Road. Water covered the route New Fairfield folks had to travel to reach their property bordering the southern portion of the new lake. The farm of Daniel S. Hatch of the Hatch Carriage and wagon manufacturing company family, was no longer a quick ride from the center of town. His World War II draft card stated his residence was New Fairfield, but his mail was delivered to RFD No. 1, Brookfield. Some of his property became the Hatch development, and he continued to farm the rest. His neighbor Frank and Tessie Cipolla and their 16 children continued to be farmers, but their address changed to Kellogg Street, Brookfield. Members of the Kellogg family were living in New Fairfield as early as 1762, but it was 5 generations later that land from their vast holdings in the Pine Swamp area of Wood Creek would be taken for the construction of the Rocky River Power Plant. Luckily, the lovely home built by Martin Kellogg in 1762 was spared and still stands today. However, the lake cut off the east side of New Fairfield, and for many years, when Consolidated School opened, the children living in this area either had to be bused around the lake to attend school or pay tuition to Brookfield to go to school there. After many years of controversy, this 450-acre area of New Fairfield was annexed to Brookfield in 1961. In 1850, Job Vincent and his wife Ruth and young daughter were living on their 60-acre farm. 3 sons, Charles, Silas, and Leonard, completed the family. After the death of Job and Ruth, it appears that the farm and a mill are passed on to Silas and his wife Harriet. The farm was located at the end of what is now Candlewood Isle. It appears that Silas was not only a successful farmer, but also a sharp businessman. His farm had increased in size and was surrounded by roads leading to Danbury, Sherman, and New Milford. This made it convenient for local farmers to bring their corn and oats to be ground for their livestock. He also provided a service to neighbors themselves by pressing their apples into cider at a cost that was lower than his nearest competitor in Danbury. After selling their farm to Connecticut Light and Power Company, they relocated to Elmwood Avenue in Bethel, Connecticut. From records, we have found Silas received one of the highest payments made by CL&P for the property they needed, which was all of his farm. His check was for $12,000. Another familiar name in the Squanch area was Joyce. Myron Joyce was born in 1840, had purchased the old Abraham Wanzer place on the eastern shore of the pond. Myron and his son Keith had dairy cows and horses and grew tobacco for a cash crop on their 250 acres. Their 1918-1919 tax list valued their holdings at $8,795, including an auto for $300. Native Americans trod these same fields centuries before, and when Keith dug a cellar for his new house in 1927, he found skeletons of 2 women and 1 man in upright sitting positions in the tradition of Indian burial. Could the male be old Chief Squanch? Unfortunately, DNA testing was not available way back then, so we will never know. Many other artifacts evolved with the turn of the shovel. A large pottery vase was so unique, Keith donated it to the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. Even before the original Squanch Pond was enlarged and joined Candlewood Lake via pipes under the causeway on Route 39, Keith sheltered a rental cottage colony by the water edge called Camp Craylow. Its success led him to welcome boarders to his new home and build a dance hall. He liked to call it a casino, but without gambling. It was New Fairfield's hotspot for square dances, motorboat races, and beauty contests. Keith's sale of some of his farmland to CL&P put Joyceland on the map, and it became a Saturday night destination. The entertainment center burnt in the mid-1950s, but the large house and cottages remain today. Squan's Pond State Park became a reality in 1926, when the State Park and Forest Commission agreed to purchase 173 acres of land that was quite mountainous, but did have shoreline on Squan's Pond and Candlewood Lake. Mrs. Clarissa Nevius, who was New Fairfield's representative to the Connecticut General Assembly for 30 years, was very instrumental in choosing the location for the park. The property was purchased for $25,000 and was owned by Nicholas Reck and Joel Joyce. For many years, camping at the park was very popular. For 50 cents a night or $15 for the summer, you could pitch a tent of any size and description. The families returned to the same location year after year, and some even decided to make New Fairfield their permanent home. In the 1960s, the state of Connecticut no longer allowed camping in the park. The pond and the park were named for Chief Squanch, a leader of the Schaghticoke tribe. We've taken a look back at New Fairfield before the Rocky River Valley was turned into a hydroelectric power source in 26 months. The farms and homesteads were replaced by a beautiful body of water that provides electricity to keep the lights on and refrigerators humming. It is a place for people to live beside and play. It brought new businesses and increased New Fairfield's population from under 500 in 1926 to over 14,000 at the last census. Families may have disliked giving up their ancestral land and way of life, but giving up their plows for power was the future. Today, the candlewood still burns brightly.
A lot of people wonder about candlewood, the name, and where it came from. Candlewood is actually any wood that, resinous wood, that when dried and lit will produce bright flame and a fire. And of course the hydrocarbons in it is what causes this to be so bright. Early in New Fairfield we were blessed with many pine trees and hemlocks and such trees that have in their heartwood as well as in the dried wood those hydrocarbons, and likely was used as torches when dried, or was used in a fireplace. The knots being used quite a bit because they have a lot of resin in them, and the heartwood would be used. But it basically would burn in a fireplace to avoid burning down the log cabin, or it was used, like I said, to travel outside as a torch. I think we're going to demonstrate that. Are we ready? Okay, we're going to see if we can get a torch going. This, of course, is the pine before it's dried out, and this is pine dried out, and this is hemlock, both of which I've already used at one time or another, outside, of course. So as you can see, it burns quickly and it burns bright. This would be slowed down with some fat or grease put on there, or if you had the money, you would have some wax maybe, and it would burn quite well. You see, I've had bound. This one is bound with wire. The other one I bound actually with grass, which probably would have been more than likely. And when you light up the hemlock, again, you can see the brightness that comes out of hemlock. And all of the sap that's in these, and this would burn quite a while to be able to travel to the barn and back, or as I said, the knots in the fireplace would keep things bright in the cabin until it was time to go to bed, which usually was around dark anyhow. And you can see they start to slow down once that early part is burning. And where they're bound, they will burn slower and keep going. And if you had some fat or grease in here, they would just keep on moving right down the shaft.